The most mysterious NBA team for me in the 90s was the Los Angeles Clippers. This is due to the Clippers being the West Coast, rarely playing on national television, and not winning a lot of games. For this video, I want to take a look at the Clippers in the 1990s and bring back memories of the key players and draft picks that perhaps may have been forgotten about. To begin, the first person to mention is former Clippers GM, Elgin Baylor. Now, I'm not one to overreact and call for people to be rapidly fired. However, growing up, it was shocking that Elgin Baylor was able to remain GM for so long. In fact, Baylor was the Clippers GM for 22 years, and during that span, the Clippers had 4 playoff appearances, 2 winning seasons, and a winning percentage of 35%. However, later on, I realized Baylor had some limitations. Then Clippers owner, Donald Sterling, was known as being cheap and wasn't too interested in retaining their homegrown talent and letting them go to free agency. Furthermore, Sterling was a major reason the LA Clippers was not a destination free agents were attracted to. As for the draft picks, I'm not sure how much influence Sterling had on these draft picks, but nonetheless the draft picks were seemingly very well associated with Elgin Baylor. Before I get to the 90s, I have to start with the 1988 NBA draft. The Clippers had the first overall selection, and they chose the obvious choice at the time, and versatile 6'10" power forward, Danny Manning. Moreover, the Clippers also had the 6th pick and selected Hersey Hawkins, but was then traded to Philadelphia along with the 1989 draft pick for another 6'10" player, and Charles Smith, who was selected 3rd overall in that same draft. I'll get more into Smith and Manning later on, but lastly, during that same 88 draft, the Clippers made a trade for Gary Grant, who was drafted 15th overall in the 1988 NBA draft. I remember Grant for more being a backup point guard during his career, and also throwing an alley-oop that accidentally went in, but during his first 4 seasons in the NBA with the Clippers, he was the main starting point guard, and to my surprise, Grant, he did average 10 assists in a season, which I had no idea about prior to doing this video. So for the 88-89 season, perhaps a lot of interest with the trio of rookies. However, Danny Manning only played 26 games due to an ACL injury. The 1988-89 Clippers finished with a 21-61 record, which resulted in the Clippers having the 2nd overall selection in the 89 NBA draft. That pick wound up being Danny Ferry, another young 6'10" player that was drafted high. However, Ferry, he refused to play for the Clippers and hence went to play in Italy for the 89-90 season. Interestingly, what wound up happening was a really great trade for Elgin Baylor and the Clippers, but not so much for Cleveland, as Danny Ferry was traded to the Cavaliers, and in return LA would get a couple of first-round picks, but in addition Los Angeles would also get a very athletic and talented player in Ron Harper. Now I know Harper may be remembered for just standing on the perimeter, passing the ball around in the triangle offense with the Bulls and Lakers while playing solid defense, but before that Harper, he was an outstanding basketball talent with the Cavaliers and the Clippers. But sadly, after playing in 35 games, Ron Harper would also tear his ACL. However, Harper would come back much later on, obviously, and play well for Los Angeles. However, he wasn't quite the same player, but still pretty damn good. The other young Clippers talented player who had an ACL injury in Danny Manning would return for that 89-90 season and would then gradually become an all-star. The 1989-90 Clippers, they finished with a 30-52 record. With all that said, and despite the injuries, entering the 1990s, a really solid young core was in place with Manning, Harper, and Charles Smith. What would wind up happening would be the glory years during the Elgin Baylor era in Clippers basketball history. Enter the 1990 NBA draft. Los Angeles, they had the 8th overall selection and drafted Bo Kimble, who only lasted 3 years in the NBA. But for the 13th overall pick, this was a selection acquired from the Danny Ferry trade. The Clippers got a pretty good player considering where they're drafting, and Loy Vaught was probably the Clippers' best player in the mid-90s, recording double-doubles. For the 1990-91 NBA season, Ron Harper, who returned from his injury in late July, but the Clippers, they finished 31-51. For the 1991 NBA draft, the Clippers, they did not have a lottery pick because they traded that pick, which is 9th overall, to Atlanta for Doc Rivers, and this was not a good trade for the Clippers. The 30-year-old Rivers had been declining since his 1988 All-Star nod, as Rivers only started in 25 games for LA. For the 1991-92 NBA season, Manning and Harper would play a full 82 games, but Charles Smith, he'd miss the first 17 games due to torn cartilage in his right knee. But you know what? With that young trio, the LA Clippers made the playoffs with a 45-37 record, and as you can see, one of the best coaches ever in Larry Brown came in later that season to help guide the Clips to the postseason. However, the Clippers lost in the first round to the Utah Jazz. So the arrow is pointing up. For the NBA draft, LA, they didn't have a lottery pick due to making the postseason, and they wound up drafting Randy Woods 16th overall, who lasted 4 seasons in the NBA while not playing a lot of minutes. But the main move for Los Angeles, made to improve the point guard position, was trading for Mark Jackson, who's as solid as it gets playing the point guard, as this was a better option than Doc Rivers. However, departing would be Charles Smith. Now, Smith's role would be drastically changed with the Knicks, but also, to be fair, this may have been the best time to trade Smith because his knees would start to be an issue as Smith's play would decline. The 92-93 Los Angeles Clippers, they finished 41-41, but once again made the playoffs but lost in the first round again in 5 games to the Houston Rockets. This 2-year period with back-to-back postseason appearances were the glory days for Clippers fans during the Elgin Baylor regime, which means dark days would be ahead for Clippers fans. Enter the 1993-1994 NBA season, and Larry Brown would no longer be the Clippers head coach. Brown was always a very nomadic coach, many coaching stops, not being at one place too long. Brown said his resignation was in everyone's best interest, according to an LA Times article. That article also mentioned the potential of several key players leaving free agency, which was a factor in Brown leaving. Bob Weiss would be the new Clippers head coach. Shooting guard Terry Dehere would be the Clippers' first-round pick, 13th overall. He started 65 games total during his 6-year NBA career. The Clippers start off with a 17-24 record. Then in February 1994, a stunning trade transpired when the first-place team in the East, the Atlanta Hawks, traded an icon, a fan favorite, and 34-year-old Dominique Wilkins, and a first-round pick for Danny Manning. So I went more into this trade from the Hawks side of things in another video, but from the Clippers' perspective, Manning was not happy in Los Angeles and was going to be a free agent and in no way was going to re-sign with the Clippers. And coming to the struggling Clippers would be Dominique Wilkins, who in short was not the right fit for Coach Lenny Wilkins when he was with the Hawks, but Wilkins, Dominique that is, did average 29 points a game in LA. However, Wilkins was also going to be a free agent. Thus, after the 93-94 season, Dominique Wilkins would sign with the Boston Celtics, and Danny Manning wound up signing with the Phoenix Suns. So the 1993-1994 LA Clippers, they finished with a 27-55 record. There was not a chance that LA was going to re-sign Manning or Wilkins, but if anything, the Clippers, they did receive a 1994 first-round pick, which is 25th overall, which ended up being Greg Minor, but he'd be traded shortly after to Indianapolis with Mark Jackson, and incoming to Los Angeles would be Eric Piatkowski, Pooh Richardson, and Malik Sealy. So Manning is gone, and furthermore, Ron Harper left LA to sign with the Chicago Bulls after averaging 20 points for the Clippers the previous season, and a new era would begin for Los Angeles Clippers basketball. Enter the 1994-1995 NBA season. Bob Weiss would also be gone, and in would be Bill Fitch to be the new head coach. Fitch had been around for a long time. He started his NBA coaching career with Cleveland in 1970 and did win a championship as head coach of the Boston Celtics for the 80-81 season. The Clippers' first-round pick, 7th overall in 1994, was Lamont Murray. So I always thought Murray was a really good perimeter scorer in college at Cal, and I thought he was able to get his own shot off with ease. But in truth and in retrospect, Murray probably wasn't as good as a perimeter player. I thought he was, but conversely, he's more athletic than what I realized back then. Seemingly, Murray had the skills to be a really good NBA player, but it didn't quite pan out. Murray's minutes would decrease after his rookie season. Fitch and Murray, they did not see eye to eye a lot, but later on Murray, he did credit Bill Fitch in an article from Cleveland.com with being able to have a lot of success in the NBA and to have an 11-year NBA career. Previous to the 94-95 season, I mostly talked about the Clippers in regards to Danny Manning, Ron Harper, and the first-round picks and some trades. But right now, with that era over, I want to show you the roster heading into this 94-95 season. This roster and all the Clippers records shown are from Basketball Reference. But anyways, while looking at the 94-95 Clippers, it's a young roster. However, it's lacking talent, and you can tell a rough period is ahead as there's nothing close to an all-star player except for maybe Loy Vaught. Alright, so the 1994-1995 LA Clippers, they went 17-65, wound up with the 2nd overall pick from the 95 NBA draft. Obviously, you're hoping to get an impact player drafting that high. LA, they drafted power forward Antonio McDyess, who could really score in the post. He was very explosive and athletic, and he came out of college as a sophomore with a lot of potential. But strangely, McDyess, he was traded on draft day to Denver, along with Randy Woods, and in return the Clippers, they received Rodney Rogers, who was a nice player and a player I really liked at Wake Forest. But after a couple of seasons, you kind of realized that Rogers was not an all-star caliber player. LA, they also received Brent Barry, who was drafted 15th in that 95 draft, but the Clippers wound up kind of giving up on him after 2.5 years and thus would trade him. But back to McDyess. So apparently, the Clippers, they didn't have time to develop someone like McDyess, and also Bill Fitch said, you got to get 2 bodies instead of 1 out of the draft if you can. Fitch said this because he did not want his team to go through another 17-win season. The 95-96 LA Clippers, they did improve though with a 29-53 record. For the 1996 NBA draft, This draft was loaded, one of the best if not the best ever, as the Clippers would have the 7th pick and wound up drafting center Lorenzen Wright, who brought really good energy and effort, but didn't really make an impact on offense and played in LA for 3 years. However, Wright was traded to Atlanta, and surprisingly in LA they were able to get 2 first-round picks that wound up being Quentin Richardson and Chris Wilcox. The 96-97 LA Clippers, they did improve again with a 36-46 record and somehow wound up making the playoffs with that record, but they did get swept in the first round by the Jazz. Enter the 97-98 season. And LA's first round pick was Maurice Taylor, 14th overall. Taylor was Michigan's best player in the Wolverines' second version of the Fab Five. Taylor, he was a nice player, but there were so many good power forwards in the NBA at this time. And after 3 years, Taylor, he wasn't too interested in staying in LA, so he left to sign with the Houston Rockets. The 1997-1998 LA Clippers, they finished 17-65. Bill Fitch, he would not return. But looking back, it seems like Fitch, he did a pretty good job improving the Clippers each of his first 3 years despite a lack of talent. Chris Ford would be the new head coach in Los Angeles, win the lottery, and had the first overall selection, and use that selection to choose Michael Olowokandi, who to simply put it became one of the worst first overall draft selections ever. The Clippers finished with a 9-41 record during a shortened 98-99 season. Obviously the Clippers, they were still lacking a lot of talent. For the following draft, the ultra-talented Lamar Odom, he was drafted 4th overall by the Clippers. Now, he had a nice 14-year career, but it seemed like he never played up to his ability. As Odom, he was very talented. Los Angeles would amass some interesting young talent in the coming years, but the Clippers would not have another winning record until the 2005-2006 season. The Los Angeles Clippers in the 90s. To me, a mysterious franchise, but to Clippers fans, perhaps a really rough decade. During the early 90s, there was a very intriguing young core that was part of the Los Angeles Clippers' glory days during Elgin Baylor's reign as Clippers GM, but subsequently, it went south quickly, and by the mid and late 90s, it was a rough era for Clippers fans. Thank you so much for your interest in this video, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I appreciate all the support. Thank you once again.